Hey everyone, thank you for joining me. I'm a guy called Joe and this is Bootstrapping Tools Let's Build, where we go through low-code applications and build solutions to help you make your workflows better, make yourself more efficient, either wow your bosses or your employees. Just if you're a scrappy bootstrapper, make yourself much more efficient. Now, before we dive into today's video, make sure to check out our YouTube channel. We got lots of different videos out there that talk about Google Sheets, Retool, Google Data Studio, Shopify, Airtable, all sorts of different types of applications out there. If you don't see something that you're looking for, feel free to drop a email to feedback@bootstrapping.tools and we'll be happy to take a look at that application, possibly make a video just for you. Now, today's topic, we're going to be going over syncing inventory changes between Shopify and Retool. If you don't know what Shopify is, it's essentially an e-commerce platform, very popular, lots of people use it. Probably a lot of the sites that you've seen are working off of Shopify. It makes it really easy for you to create a website and sell products online, whether that's your own products or your drop shipping. And Retool, if you haven't used it before, we have lots of videos on it. It's essentially a low-code application. You do have to write a decent amount of code. It lets you kind of dive in there if you want, but it is low-code because you get to drag and drop components into a UI without having to recreate them every step of the way. So let's dive into it. Let's go over to our Retool application. I got a brand new one set up over here right now called just inventory sync Shopify to Retool. And over here, we already have a query that's pre-populated thanks to Retool. Let's call this get all variants. Now, the reason I'm saying get all variants is because in the Shopify API, when you pull product level information, you're actually going to get all the products and not just the variants. So we go over here, product information, you'll see that you get a endpoint, a get endpoint for the admin API, which gives you all of the products. And then within the products themselves, you're going to see a field for variants. So let's actually go ahead and just grab this endpoint. We'll just copy that over and then go over to our Retool application, just plop it in right here. And then let's hit the preview button and see what we get back. You'll see we have products. And as you scroll down, you'll see that there are variants underneath each one of those products. So what we want to do, because inventory levels are actually on a variant level, so variant meaning the individual unique SKU value or stock keeping unit. So since the inventory is on that level, you want to make sure that you're grabbing all of that data. So one of the things that we're going to actually do here, let's plop this open maximized. What we're going to do is we're going to enable a transformer here. Essentially what a transformer lets you do in Retool is to take the API response that you're getting from whatever API you're connecting to, in this case Shopify's API, and let you manipulate that data however you need. So in here, what we're going to do is we're going to dive into that products and response that we just got, that whole list of products, and then we're going to take out all the variants and then just group them all up together. So first thing we're going to do is let's remove all of this code. We don't really need it. We're going to say var products, which means we're just declaring a variable for the products, and then data is what is going to be assigned to the API response that you're getting back already. So we're going to do data.products. And the reason we're doing that is because within the API response, products is actually the object that you want to grab from that API. So we're going to say data.products. And just to make sure that we're returning, that we're getting the right stuff, let's go ahead and just return products. And when we preview this, we should see the same exact output. Beautiful. So no longer do you see the products, but you'll get everything within an array, and that's indicated by the little square bracket on the side here. So now that we have this, what we want to do is we're going to get the variance out of there. So let's declare variable variance and then set that to an open array. You can add semicolon, you don't have to, up to you. And then what we're going to do now is we're going to iterate or loop through all the products that you have in your API request and just grab the variance from there. So we're going to do a for loop. You can do whatever type of loop you want. My go-to is always a for loop because it's really easy to use. So we'll do I equals 0, I is less than products.length, and then we'll do I plus plus to iterate through it. So every single time we're finished with it, we're going to add 1 to I so that we go through each and every single product that's available in this data set. So in here, we're going to say variance.push, and push is just a way to append additional data into our empty array for variants. So we're going to take the products and we're going to indicate I for that. So the I, yes, number, the whatever the iteration of the products, taking that, and we're going to take variance from there. I'm going to push it in. So let's change our return over to variance. When we preview, we should see most likely a bunch of variant information, just like this one, but it's going to be in nested arrays. When we preview that, you'll see here, let's see if I can zoom in for you. You'll see that there's a square bracket and then another square bracket over here. There's two of them, and then you display the information. That's because the variants that you're getting from the API response are already in an array. So what we actually want to do here is we're going to do a flat. And what that essentially does, it's a JavaScript action that you take the entire array and all the nested arrays and you just flatten it out into one single level. So when we do this, we're going to see that the second square bracket over here in the response gets removed, and we'll just see all of the variants one by one. So let's preview that. And as you can see, exactly what we want here. Now we have all of the variants as individual objects within this array. So let's go ahead and save this, and let's display our data. So let's minimize this over here, and then on the right hand side, I'm going to see an option for tables, which is a component that Retool is pre-built for us. We're going to take that, we're going to drag it into our workspace here. And because Retool is assuming that we want to display all variance data, it already displays that data in here for getVariance.data. You can see we have a lot of data in here. We probably don't need all of that, but that's okay. We can adjust that using the options on the right sidebar here. So let's give ourselves a little bit more room to play with. I think that's pretty good. That's about what, like 7, 8 products or something like that, maybe 9. Now on the column side over here, let's see, what do we need? What's interesting to the end user? You're always thinking about the end user. Since you are creating an application, you want to think about what does the user need to see and what they don't need to see. The data will still be there even if you hide it, so you can always reference it later on. But what we want to do right now is just make it prettier on the UI. So we don't need the ID. The user's not going to use the ID very much. Product ID, most likely not. Title, that makes sense. Price, that makes sense. The SKU, which is once again the stock keeping unit, that's one of those key elements of a variant, so we'll keep that up there. Position is not so important. Inventory policy, all this stuff we can actually remove. And then option 1 and option 2 is the size and the color. This is just like attributes of that variance, so we can keep those. Option 3 we actually don't have populated, so we can remove that. And just go down the list, created at, updated at, we can keep those. Taxable is just a check mark, so not very helpful. We don't have any barcode information in this sample data set, so we can just remove that. And just go down the list. Let's remove everything that doesn't make sense. Now, because we're syncing inventory quantities, let's keep the inventory quantity there. The old inventory quantity, you don't really need it, so let's go ahead and hide that. Require shipping, obviously, and then this graph API ID only comes through the API, and this is because Shopify allows you to connect to their APIs either via REST or GraphQL. We're not using that, so we can hide that as well. If you are interested in GraphQL, leave a comment down below, and I'll make a video specifically about connecting to Shopify using GraphQL. It's a little bit different from REST API, but it's not too bad. So leave a comment if you're interested in that, and we'll make a video about it. So now that we have our data, the ones that make the most sense or the most impact for the user, we can start to manipulate this a little bit here. So as I mentioned earlier, option 1 is actually size. So we can rename that to size so that's really clear for the user. And option 2 is color. So let's go ahead and remove that and change it up to color as well. Now the created at and updated at dates, those come in as like string, not really a string, but like a full format, including time zone and everything. We don't necessarily need that. So you can change the column type over to date. That way we just have August 14th, 2021. Then we can do the same thing for updated at. We can make that a date. If you want to change how it displays because you don't like underscores for whatever reason, you can do that as well in here. So we can say last updated at, and we can say created at. So now we have a nice clean table and the inventory quantity that we want to update. What we can do here is we can go into our options. So double click on the inventory quantity, And then you'll notice that within our options, we have one that says make editable. So when we trigger that on, it's going to make it so that we can update this column. So you'll see that it's indicated by this little edit icon up on the top of the column over here that indicates that we can actually edit this column. So now that we can edit it, here's where the fun happens. So we change this, let's say we change this to 5, it's going to turn yellow. And if we change this, same thing, it's going to turn yellow. Now, what Retool does for us is it saves this in a temporary state called change set. So if we open up the left panel bar, you can do that up on the top over here. See a couple of different panels. We open up the left one, it's going to show us, or it's going to give us the information about what's going on in this table. So underneath components on the left hand side, click on that. I'm going to see a bunch of data that's coming out here, and change set is the one that we want. So when we pop that open, you notice that there are 2 keys in here. One of them is 0 and one of them is 2. And the great part about this is that Retool is now keeping track of which rows within this table we're actually changing. That way we don't need to try to map it or do some complicated JavaScript to figure out which part or which value we're actually updating. So with the change set, that's what we're going to use to figure out what values we need to grab in order to post that data back into the Shopify API. So now that we have this, let's go ahead and create a new JavaScript query. And then we can call this change data. All right, let's say get and set change data. You can name it whatever you want. I just like to be a little bit more verbose with mine. And within here, let's do a couple of rounds here just to make sure we're doing the right thing. So we're going to first start off with getting the change data out of this table. So let's say change sets equals table1 dot change set. That's an object. And let's return this so that we can see it in the preview. Preview that. We see we have 2 keys. One of them is 0 with inventory quantity of 5, just like we changed it. And then number 2 is the inventory quantity, which is set to 10, exactly like what we did. So it's 0 and 2 now. Now, what we want to do is we need to go into each individual row and then grab out the inventory item ID, because that's going to be required when we go into the Shopify API. And just quickly before we dive into that, let me just show you real quick. You go over to inventory and the inventory level. This is the endpoint that we want. And then post admin blah 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 inventory level / set. And within here we need the inventory item ID, the location ID, and then available, which is just the quantity of the inventory that we want to set it to. So we don't need to copy this just yet, but just keep in mind that we need inventory item ID, location, and available. So going back over to Retool, what we want to do now is let's get the table data. So we can say table1 var table data equals table1.data. That's going to be a full array. So now we have the entire set of table data. And then we want to grab the information and kind of put them together. So let's set a temporary array here. We'll just leave it as an empty array for now. And then we're going to sort through all of the change set data that we have. So we can say for I equals 0, very simple loop function here. I is less than change set dot length I plus plus. And then within this function, let's say let's get the inventory item ID. So we can say var. Actually, before we do this, you'll notice that the key values here, we actually need to get the object keys first. So let's make one that's keys, and then we're going to do object, and this is a JavaScript function here, object keys, and then we're going to say change set. So let's actually return that so that we can see what it looks like. And you'll see that 0 and then 2. Now the reason we're doing this is because we have to iterate through the change set values, and then also go and map that to the rows within the data set. Because they're both arrays, the change set value is going to map directly to the position within that table. So instead of doing a nested loop over here, we're just going to say let's change the change set to keys over here. And then we'll say inventory item ID equals to the table data. And then in the square brackets here, we're going to say keys I dot inventory item ID. And it's inventory item ID because in the results, this is actually the raw data that we're getting back from the variance table. That variable is called inventory item ID with underscores in between. So with that, let's go ahead and just shove that into our temp over here. So we'll do temp.push, and then we'll grab the inventory item ID and push it in there. And let's return the temp to see what we get. Whoop. Accidentally put in a backspace. Typos. That's the life, isn't it? All right, so perfect. So within our temporary array, we have the item IDs for the 2 items that we're changing here. Once we have that, let's actually also add in now, we need the available quantity. So what we'll do here is var available equals to, and this is where we need to get the change set data. Change set, and then also keys I dot inventory quantity, and that's inventory quantity because that's what it is labeled as in the variant data set that we're grabbing. So even though we're going to be passing through the variable as available to the Shopify API to set that data, we actually need to pull it as inventory quantity. So inventory quantity, and then let's add that over to the end of this. And before we do that, let's actually make this into an object array. So inventory item ID colon that, and then we'll do available to available. So when we run this, we should see 2 keys or 2 values pop up, each one of them with nested values. Preview. So we have 0, which is 2 keys, the inventory item ID, and then the available amount, which is 5. And then the other one is inventory ID with available 10. Exactly what we want. Now, you'll notice that this is actually a string right now. We don't want that because the inventory post endpoint needs it to be an integer. And actually here, right here, this is the example to give us. So we need to set this into an integer instead of a string. So to make that change, we can do something really simple here. We can just set number and then wrap the entire thing in that. So when we preview this, it should turn back or give back to us an integer instead of a string. So now that we have everything in that we need, this is great. We can go ahead and save this. What we need to do is to create a new query that does a post request over to Shopify. So let's go ahead and create a new resource query. And then we're going to set that to our Shopify demo query. And then we're going to go back into the Shopify API documentation, copy over this endpoint, the admin inventory level set. I'm going to place that in here. And then there are 3 variables that we have to pass through: inventory item ID, location ID, and available. So let's make variables for that right in here. So we actually need to set this action type into post. And it's going to give us a body for JSON. And we can do location ID, inventory item ID, and then available. So now this next part is a little bit tricky. It's something that is unique to Retool and the way that you do it. It's basically like you have to call the query, you have to trigger it, and also add what they call additional scopes. And that way, when you call this this query here, what it's going to do is going to grab the information from how you're calling it and then pass it through so they can be used when we make that API request. The location ID, if you remember, it wasn't in here. If you have a small store, you most likely don't really have anything that's very vastly different. So you most likely just have one one location ID. So I actually have mine over here just saved to make it easy for us. And then we'll go, let's save this, and we can rename this to post inventory levels. we'll save that. And going back into our get and set change data, we're going to call that query by typing it in here, post inventory level, and then we're going to say dot trigger. This is a function. So within here, I'm going to do object, and we're going to do additional scope. All right, and then within here we have to pass another object, and that's going to include the data that we just grabbed from up above. So inventory item ID is going to equal to that, and then available is going to be equal to that. At this point, you can remove the temporary array that we created, but there's no real need to it. It doesn't really take up that much memory when we process things. So let's go ahead and save this. We actually can't run it yet because we need to take these and then add it into our post inventory level query. So going back over to post inventory level query, we're going to say inventory ID equals the double curly brackets, and not available. Let's do inventory item ID. And it's going to say that it's not found. Don't worry about that. It's going to be found when we actually run it through the get and set change data script. Let's go ahead and save this. All right, so when we run this, we're going to get the console log that gives us the same exact information that we're passing through this post inventory level trigger. So we run this, and we should see successfully ran, which is great. But you'll notice here that this still isn't updated, which is fine. So if we refresh this, actually, I think we need to run the get all variants again. Oh, no, it did change. Okay, perfect. So now that that has changed, let's run it one more time just to make sure that we're seeing all the changes. We can make this 50. That's a really large number. There's no way we're going to miss that. We run it. It just runs through once. We post the inventory level. This is now 50. And then if we refresh the data set, it should still say 50. Perfect. So now that we have the table in an editable state, and we have our queries, our API requests all set up, it's time to hook this table up to it so that as we make changes and we hit a save changes button, it'll call that script to get and set change data. So let's change this back to 10, and when we click off from it, that turns yellow and you'll see a save changes button. So scrolling on the right hand side over here, right above my head, you'll see an event handlers option. I'm going to add a new one. We're going to say on the event, you click on the save changes, you're going to trigger this query, get and set change data. So now that it's set to 10, when we hit the save changes, it runs the queries, and then you'll notice that it hasn't updated yet. If we hit the refresh button, it goes back to 10. So this is where it gets a little bit tricky, because now once we run this get and set change data script, we also want to refresh the get all variants query. So at the end here, event handlers, I'm going to add a new one. On success, trigger the get all variants option. And before we save it, there's actually a little bit of a delay that we actually need to set, because remember, we're making changes, we're throwing those changes up to the Shopify API, and we should wait a little bit before we actually pull the data back down. And we can do it here. We can also do it at the post inventory level query, but it really depends how you want to do it. If you do it on the post inventory level, you're going to do it for every single time. So if you have changes for all of them, it's going to do it each and every single time. That's a lot of queries to be throwing over to Shopify. So instead of that, we're going to do it on the get and set change data script, and then we're going to go over to the advanced options here, and then we're going to go to run event handlers after ms or milliseconds. And what this basically does is lets us set a delay here. I was testing this a little bit earlier, and I felt that 2500 milliseconds was pretty good. It's about 2.5 seconds, not too long for the user, and it still lets us refresh this data. So let's change this 11 value over to 5, and then we can do the same thing for this one. Let's change it to 10. And we hit the save changes button. It's going to run that. It's going to wait 2.5 seconds, and it's going to run to get all variants, and then we should see those changes appear. So now we have 10 and 10. Do it one more time. So 25, I think that worked before. Save the changes. So change it to 20, and then when it runs again, change it to 25. So you can set the delay a little longer if you're noticing that it's taking a little bit extra time. So let's say we set it to 300 milliseconds or 3 seconds. We save that. And then let's change this to 50. Let's actually change these bottom two to 50, and then this one to 50. So we should have 350 values all together here once we run this. Hit save changes. You're gonna see that the table refreshes back to the old state of it. And then once it refreshes itself, 50, 50, and 50. And that's only about 3 seconds. It's not too bad for the user. There's probably a better way to do it, but that would take a little bit of time for us to figure out what the timings are like. But essentially, this is how you're gonna sync data to Shopify, the inventory quantity. So you can change it here. And if we go over to our Shopify UI over here, click over to inventory, you'll see they have a pretty decent UI for all of this. This is the one that we just changed to 50 before. Let's set this over to 10. We hit save. And then we go back into our application here. Let's hit the preview button. You see that that first 50, is that the same one? AD2 white 1. This is 82. So this is the 50. So that's still 50. What was the one that we changed? Oh, this one, white 10. So this changed to 10. So let's actually change everything over there. Make sure that we're looking at the right data here. So we're going to set this to 10. Save that. And then there's another 50 somewhere, but it's not in this view. Here it is. Let's set this to 10. Save that. Go here. Hit the refresh button. And we'll see that all of them changed 10. 10, 10, and 10. So I think I'm going to run this one more test. Let's say this is the one, 8001 white 10. Let's copy that. And it's actually one of the things that I like about using Retool. You can, because you're using a table, you're able to just use their built-in filtering capabilities, and it's pretty fast. So you can change this. Let's set this to 100, an absurd amount of inventory change. And let's do the save changes. I'm gonna run that. It's gonna wait about 3 seconds, and then it's going to run the changes. Again, I thought I was gonna run the changes, but refresh this. It's showing 100, and we go into Shopify. Let's also filter by this value here. It refreshes, and then available is 100 now. So there's a little bit of timing that you have to do in order to make sure that everything is showing the right data. But of course, you should always just be trying to refresh your user's UI whenever you possibly can. And that's essentially it. That's how you sync data sets between Shopify and Retool. If you do run into any issues or anything like that, feel free to drop a comment in the section below. Always happy to help. Anybody who's running into issues, happy to answer any questions, or if you are looking for something a little bit different, let us know. I'm happy to make a video about that as well. Of course, if you like this video, make sure to hit that like button. Give us a thumbs up. It's the best way to support this channel and help scrappy bootstrappers just like yourself figure out how to use or leverage low-code applications just like Retool or AppSheets or whatever else out there and make their daily operations or workflows much more efficient. We've got a bunch of other videos as well on the YouTube channel. We're always releasing, we're trying to release 2 a week on several different types of topics. So make sure to hit that subscribe button and the bell so you get notified when we release the next video. But that's it for today. This has been Bootstrapping Tools. Let's Build. I'm a guy called Joe. It's been a pleasure, and we're out.